Mr. President.
Associated Press, Zeke.
So do you have any plans to speak with President Putin at this point? And what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military operations in Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to aspire to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin. Wall Street Journal, Tarina.
Mr. President, you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we've proposed on all their banks have of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show, this is going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming, I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together, and we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going beyond?
Yes.
Thank you. Two topics, just really quick. First, markets are down and gas prices are up. I know you always stress the difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, he was, I made it clear, as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read the, I shouldn't, I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And we're now going to, he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's
Because it
attacking
will so
Ukraine as we
weaken his
speak?
country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choices of whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if
It's not a bluff, it's on the table.
sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President?
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment. No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened.
And
look, well, anyway.
And can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President.
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States?
Sir, India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you.
President Biden in the East Room talking about the military action, the invasion underway from Russia into Ukraine there. The president saying this is a dangerous moment for all of Europe and going on to say, but the entire world now sees what Putin is all about. Naked aggression, saying Putin desires an empire. He wants to put the Soviet Union back together, in so many words, the president said. He outlined a series of sanctions against additional banks, including Russia's largest bank. He said every asset Russia has access to in America is now closed off. He believes the actions taken today will cut off imports into Russia by at least half. He also reiterated what the White House, what the president has said now for many, many days, that our forces are not in the region to engage with Russia in Ukraine or otherwise, though he was pressed just moments ago that if Putin continues on this march and goes into any NATO countries, the president conceded if he moves into NATO countries, well, then we will be involved. But obviously, we are far from that at the moment. Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, you heard several reporters there at the White House, including our own Cecilia Vega, asking about the power of these sanctions. Are they working? Are they enough? And whether or not this White House, this president is prepared to sanction Vladimir Putin directly.
Yeah, it is clear he is still leaving that on the table, but Biden's sending a very clear message that this is Vladimir Putin's war and that Putin now will pay the price, announcing these harsh new sanctions, including what he described as being the most impactful, the most painful, going after these major Russian banks. And he again reiterated that this is a unified response. We know he's been in constant communication with NATO leaders, with the G7 leaders just earlier today in a virtual meeting here at the White House, saying if Putin's intent was to somehow see the West splinter in reaction to this, that he is seeing, in fact, the exact opposite. Putin is trying to test the resolve of the West, and the West is united. And telling our Cecilia Vega that, these sanctions aren't intended to prevent Putin, but really to inflict pain on him so that the Russian people can see the impact of Putin's actions here. And while he is leaving something on the table, those sanctions against Putin himself, he also made clear what is not on the table, reiterating again that there will be no U.S. troops going into Ukraine, because he has warned over and over again that that would spark another world war, David.
You heard Mary, the president asked there, has there been a complete rupture of a U.S.-Russian relations? He said, absolutely, there has been a rupture of our relationship with Russia, given what's playing out, what Putin has decided to do in the global stage. He said, we'll see what happens in the future when it comes to the relationship between the two countries. He was asked whether or not this is the beginning of another Cold War. He said it will be a cold day, certainly for Russia, given the sanctions that have been imposed and the unity that the president says he comes to the table with as far as sanctions are concerned against Russia. He said NATO stands united, and this is a point that the White House has made several times in recent days, that this is perhaps the strongest we've seen NATO in many, many years, the relationship. I want to bring in our senior foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, on the ground in Ukraine. Ian, we were on the air late last night when, in the middle of the night, Moscow time, Vladimir Putin told the Russian people this was a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine. And now, less than 24 hours later, we're watching an assault from multiple directions there in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right, David. I mean, the situation on the ground is serious, and it's growing more serious, really, by the hour. I think what we've now seen is this concerted three-pronged attack from the south, from the northeast, and from due north of the capital, Kiev. Russian special forces have taken this airfield, which is just around 20 miles north of the capital here. There's been ongoing battles with Ukrainian forces. They appear now to be in control of that. In Chernobyl, which is about 65 miles or so due north of the capital, Kiev, again, Russian forces appear in control there. Heavy fighting is taking place in Kharkiv in the northeast, and also down towards Crimea in the south. Again, Russian forces seem to have overwhelmed Ukrainian defences in one of the first key towns on Ukrainian soil. And what it looks like is an attempt to try and encircle Kiev, and the situation in the capital is looking increasingly dire.
And, of course, the question, Ian, the world has right now in watching these forces encircle Kyiv, as you've just pointed out, does this, in fact, mean that Vladimir Putin wants a change in government there?
Yeah, I think really the attempt here seems to be to try and decapitate the government. We know that the Biden administration tried to urge President Zelensky to leave. That was something he didn't want to do. He has tried to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people who've really been tested today. We met one, she's a news anchor, morning news anchor, who we'd interviewed a couple of weeks ago. They were preparing for the worst. Her husband had volunteered for the civil defence. Today he had to go off to the front line. They had to take their 3 children on their own to a hotel in the west of the country, where they've been checked into that hotel, left on their own. He's gone back and gone to the front lines. She's now on her own in an apartment, wondering what does she do if Russian forces come in. So real difficult choices that ordinary Ukrainians are having to make. But the reality is, it looks like an attempt to decapitate the military and take out the Ukrainian government.
One last quick question before I let you go there, Ian. You mentioned it there, and it's a breaking headline while we were on the air, a confirmation of the Chernobyl zone, the so-called exclusion zone. You mentioned there that Russian forces now have control of that, and we should remind our audience, after years, obviously, of reporting on Chernobyl, that this is still a very dangerous site.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a very high-risk area. It is known as an exclusion zone, and the Ukrainian government have conceded that they've lost control of that area, but also said they can't guarantee the safety of that Chernobyl site, which is still very much active and dangerous, even though it's effectively capped. One imagines that's another bridgehead towards the capital, Kiev, but we have to wait and see. the ball is entirely in Vladimir Putin's court. There is military resistance taking place by the Ukrainians, but what we're seeing here is overwhelming power in the hands of the Kremlin and its forces on the ground.
All right, just extraordinary reporting from Ian Pannell and our team inside Ukraine. Ian, thank you. We know a state of emergency in effect in Ukraine, a curfew in effect. President Zelensky urging anyone in the country who can take up arms to do so and fight for independence to protect their sovereign nation from attack from the Russians. I do want to check in with James Longman, who is based in Moscow, for us during this escalation. And James, you and I were talking just before we came on the air that there have been a number of Russians in the streets actually protesting Vladimir Putin's actions here, but they've been swiftly taken off the streets.
Yeah, that's right, David. Hundreds actually came out here in downtown Moscow to protest against the decision to invade Ukraine. And you can see riot police here, because that is the response you're met with if you protest in Vladimir Putin's Russia. You can see them in blue here. And we have been watching. And in fact, during those comments by President Biden, at least 3 people ripped off the street, arrested, taken away. Over 1,200 now arrests across Russia against this decision. Look, a lot of young people feel very passionately this is not the man they feel represents them. But the reality is a great majority, really, of Russians read and watch so much state media that they are believing the messages that they're being told about the threat that Ukraine poses. But here tonight in Moscow, a lot of real feeling about the anger that this decision has provoked in them. David?
James Longman in Moscow on the protesters who dared to go in the streets, protest Putin's actions, but then were arrested, taken off the streets. That's the picture there. Of course, the picture inside Ukraine, the fear that Ian Pannell described, and many Ukrainians asking, what is the end game here? What does Putin really want? We should mention the markets here in this country down more than 500 points at this hour. We continue to watch the immediate global economic impact of Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and of course, I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight. If there are major developments before then, we'll be back on the air. I'm David Muir in New York. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.